wanted to paint this bird the moment I saw it, and I think you will enjoy painting it with me. Let me show you how step by step, and I will share my favorite tips for painting realistic feathers. The bird has so much color and personality, I thought it deserved its own flower setup, so when my Patreon subscribers asked for a detailed tutorial on painting white flowers, I immediately thought I should create a composition featuring a peony bush with this lovely parrot reaching for the white flower with hints of Quinacridone Red on the petals that echo the vibrant red on the feathers. You will find all watercolor materials I use in the video description below, including the reference photo link, and if you are my Patreon subscriber, you will find the black and white outline along with a real-time non-sped up recording of this video tutorial. Now let's get started. Here's the first tip for painting colorful birds. Before you paint the feather details, make sure to create a light underpainting to block off the large areas of color. This will allow you to focus on shadows and textures with ease later on without having to worry about the overall shape and volume. I'm going to start with red, and here my main color is Quinacridone Red. Beautiful, staining, transparent color. Mine is from QOR. You can find it in most watercolor ranges, so Daniel Smith or Winsor & Newton. I'm going to simply put down a layer of this red on those areas where I see red feathers, and you can continue all the way with this red all the way up to the head of the bird, but if you want to get a bit more realism and you have a cooler magenta, use that at the bottom because our source of light is coming from the top, so feathers at the bottom are going to be in the shadow, and as you move up towards the eye, you really want that area to stand out more, so you could use a warmer red. I decided to go with Quinacridone Coral. So we have a nice transition from our base red color to sort of cooler magenta in the shadow area and a really warm peachy sort of red around the eye. I apply this technique of sort of stretching my base color towards cooler side of the spectrum and warmer side of the spectrum all the time. I just did a tutorial describing this technique in detail, so you can watch it after this video. But for now, let's move on to the wing, and I started with a yellowish green. I'm going to continue with hooker's green. Even though this is an underpainting, I want to add a little bit of a sense of volume, and I'm using my darker green all around this block of feathers, and the yellow, the lighter, warmer color, is concentrated in the middle. And at the base of the wing, I'm going to bring out my Winsor Blue Red shade. You can find something similar like Phthalo Blue Red shade in other watercolor ranges, but essentially a warm, staining, transparent blue, blending it right into that light green wash. And this is the blue that we're going to use for the rest of the bird on all the feathers. It's sort of our main warm, vibrant blue, and you can glaze it over and over again to achieve more depth. At this point, you can already drop a little bit of purple into the blue because there will be some purple feathers in that area, or you can wait until the next layer. And now I'm going to work on the larger block of blue under the wing, on the belly, going all the way up to those longer tail feathers. Notice here I'm going slightly more saturated because that area is going to be in the shadow, and so I'm not afraid to go just a few shades darker, but still light enough so we can glaze on top of it. Now the tip of the tail feathers I'm going to make very dark, and I'm using Indigo, which is the darkest blue I have. It looks almost black next to the vibrant Phthalo blue. You can use black instead of indigo. This is a stylistic preference. I tend to not use black in my paintings unless I'm doing something very, very decorative. And I'm going to finish off the top section of the parrot, the blue feathers on top, starting with my main blue. And as I move over into the wing area, I'm going to use purple, and here you can see that I'm adding the second layer on top of our first, just trying to follow the shapes of the feathers that I see in the reference photo. And my blue is gently blending with my purple. I'm going to finish off this section with my Phthalo blue red shade, or Winsor blue red shade. You can see that the edges are not quite smooth. I'm using the tip of my brush to sort of get into the red areas just a little bit. I don't want a smooth edge. I want an indication that there are tiny feathers there. So I'm using the tip of my brush always in a direction of the feathers as I see them in the reference photo, just creating a little bit of a jagged edge. And for the head of the bird, which is very dark, we need to start with a blue underpainting because we will have some highlights. So we will follow up with very dark saturated indigo in the next step, but for now, blue with maybe hints of purple is what we need in that area to have a good base, a starting point. And the claws will have a phthalo blue underpainting. Try to leave some highlights on each claw. It will really help us create a sense of realism. And to finish off this layer, we need a very warm yellow. I'm using Benzo Yellow from QOR. So the inside of the eye and the beak. Try again on the beak to leave a highlight by painting around just a strip of white, and right next to it I'm going to drop a little bit of quinacridone coral. Our underpainting is almost ready. I may add a little bit of green to some of the feathers in the back, and by doing this I'm really making sure that the yellow lighter feathers, the shorter feathers in the middle of the wings, stand out more. That's it for this step, and once it is dry, and I would leave it for a couple hours to make sure that it's completely dry, the water has evaporated, we can move on to the next step and we will work towards something like this. You can see a lot more definition here. We're going to be working primarily on the shadow areas and defining the shapes of the feathers. You can see that at this point I used my pencil to outline the feathers, but if you're using my outline, which you can download on Patreon site, you would already have the feathers ready at this point. I just added a little bit of my indigo into Winsor blue to make it a bit darker. I'm outlining the color block, the blue color block, with the tip of my brush with some color, and then blending with clear water towards the center. What I'm gonna do now is actually carry it over and into the red area, because I want the red feathers to also be in the shadow, and I'm gonna, instead of using simply more saturated red there, actually paint with a very faint layer of warm blue. You can see by glazing it, it actually appears sort of purple or violet. And now I'm moving on to the leg with just pure phthalo blue, being a lot more precise on those feather details. Again, I simply outlined that block and then used clear water in the center to create a bit of volume. Now let's work on that section on top, starting with Winsor blue again, the same one. Notice that the direction of my strokes is always following the direction of the feathers. So here it's sort of on a diagonal from the bird's neck towards the wings. I'm going very slowly, just using the tip of my brush, and that creates a sense of more realistic feathers, because the feathers are very small, they have highlights, and if I were just to cover the entire section with color, we would lose those highlights. Instead, I'm just using the tip of my brush, and so there will be some strips left blank. I didn't do it on the bottom because there's not a lot of light there, so not a lot of highlights, but here on top, I'm just using this very light tip of the brush method to have more realism. Now I think it's time to switch to our green, just following the pencil outline. See, I'm outlining the feather, and then what I'm going to do is blend it with clear water towards the tip. Typically where feathers overlap, where one is sort of disappearing under the next one, there will be more contrast. I'm trying to create a sense of like a feather cascade. You see, I just blended it with clear water, and there is one layer, one cascade of feathers and another one right on top. And now from there, I'm going to try and create the same effect as I move closer to the center. Again, following the pencil outlines, focusing on the area of the overlap. That's where we want our darker color, and then I'm going to blend it with clear water so the tips appear lighter, creating more contrast in the area where they overlap with the next layer. So you can see the yellow is now shining through. Now let's get back to our original Quinacridone Red, starting with the long feathers in the back on the tail. Here on the area under the eye, I'm going to use Quinacridone Coral. It's warmer, it's gonna make the head of the bird appear closer and more vibrant. Just around the eye, on the cheeks, very lightly, and then at the bottom I'm switching to cooler magenta because the bottom of the neck is in the shadow. Again here, just using the tip of my brush, very light strokes where I want to see some texture. More saturated red all the way at the bottom and more coverage, no highlights there. So more like a solid layer of color. And then as I move up closer to where the light is coming from, I'm switching to smaller strokes. Let's leave our red feathers alone, let them dry, and go for your darkest color. I'm using Indigo. You can more or less use any soft black if you want. I don't like using black for natural subjects unless I'm doing something very decorative. Typically, I go for Indigo or Perylene Violet for dark feathers or any kind of shadows, but here I'm going with Indigo. It blends beautifully. I'm just glazing it on top of blue, so Indigo is just like a very dark blue. On top of our warm Winsor blue red shade, it looks almost black. So I'm going to use it on the head of the bird. Again, tiny strokes, starting with the outline of that color block and leaving some highlights in the middle. Don't forget the line on the beak. I'm going to come back to the belly, and now that I see how dark my head turned out, I'm going to add a bit more saturation at the bottom on the belly and under the tail wings. We're adding additional value in the areas that don't get the light that's coming from the top right. So glazing slowly is the best approach here, just working on one area at a time and checking the balance of values. You can see I'm adding tiny bits of my Winsor blue on what I see are the darkest areas of the bird, even carrying it over the red color block, again in the area of the shadow. Glazing it that way slowly without going too dark right away will help you achieve that sense of realism without making an error of going too dark. We can't erase watercolors, so at this point you can sort of judge by how dark your feathers are turning out. You don't have to go over every color block the same number of times that I do. At this point you have to kind of look at where your bird is at and decide for yourself if you want to add more color, if you want to continue glazing. First time around, I definitely overworked this bird. I didn't leave enough light areas, so I'm trying to be careful here, but you can see I'm struggling and I keep adding more color. So I'm going to leave the feathers for now, add a bit more of that quinacridone coral on the beak, and give those areas a break, let them dry. Now I'm going to work on the eye, and this is tricky because I started with a very small drawing, so I'm not going to be able to get everything that I see in the reference photo, but I will try with the tip of my brush to get the main shapes. So depending on how large your painting is, you can also simplify some of the details. So definitely the center of the eye and the outline around the yellow parts. I'm going to try to get other details, but I may not be able to. I feel like perhaps this should be enough. I'm just going to paint the nostril, and now that I see the top of the head is dry, and as watercolors dry out they always look lighter, I'm adding a bit more texture, and all of this I'm using indigo for. So again, no black, but feel free to use black if you don't have indigo or if you want to go for more contrast. Now that area around the eye, we didn't do an underpainting there. Now I feel like I'm ready, and I'm just going to use the same warm blue. I don't think I'm going to introduce anything new at this point. Now I just quickly wanted to show you how I painted the stem that the bird is sitting on. This is entirely made up. In the reference photo, the branch is a lot thicker, but here, because I'm using this bird as part of a larger composition with peony flowers, I'm just imagining that the bird is sitting on the stem. So I put a light wash of green, hooker's green, and added some shadows using Winsor green blue shade, and also the same Quinacridone Red at the bottom of the stem. You can place this little parrot on any kind of branch or flower stem. I'm pretty sure he's light enough for a peony or even a rose. So the only thing I'm going to need to add now is the back claw on his right leg, because in the reference photo he's sitting on a branch that's quite thick, so you can't see his claws in the back. I'm going to have to imagine what that looks like if he was holding on to something thinner. And before we start working on the feet, I'm just going to add some contrast around the eye. It's very important. I really want that area to stand out and be very crisp. I'm going to go around the beak with my Perylene violet. You can use purple or even the same blue. And I'm going to add a little bit of contrast at the bottom of the neck. Again, using the tip of my brush in the direction of the feathers. And I also need to add some definition to the lower part of the beak. And now the fun part, the feet of the bird. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm outlining the toes. I'm not sure if they're called toes, if it's a bird, but I'll just go with that. And using the tip of my brush to create the texture. It's kind of a rubbery, wrinkled surface there, so you can see I'm going just very lightly, building more and more contrast. Because my strokes are so thin, the water evaporates almost immediately. I don't have to wait to do the next layer, so I'm just sort of adding more and more color with the tip of my brush, leaving some lines without any pigment so that our underpainting can shine through, creating sort of a sense of a highlight. In the last minute, I'm going to outline the toes one more time using Indigo. And the very last detail that I'm going to add is just tiny strip of Winsor Blue Red shade to add a sense of dimension on the claws, just around those highlights. Our bird is done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can practice just painting the bird, or you can try to incorporate him into a larger painting like I did. Either way, this is a really fun and colorful subject to practice on, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching.